10 years. She had given him 10 years. 10 years of believing. 10 years of waiting. 10 years of getting back up every time life knocked her down. And in the end, it took Lucian less than 10 seconds to destroy all of it.
Chapter 1.
The Great Hall of Valethorn was full for the crescent moon ritual. Torchlight moved across stone. The sacred circle glowed at the center of the marble floor. Nobles lined the edges in silk and jewels, watching as if they had come for a sacred tradition and a public spectacle in equal measure. Talia stood near one of the stone columns in a deep blue dress, the best she owned. Her hands were hidden in the folds of her skirt so no one would see them shake. She had grown up inside Valethorn's walls, but never belonged cleanly to any part of them. Not noble, not servant, not family. Not quite anything people knew how to name without lowering their voices first. Her parents had been royal guards. They died on the northern border when she was 8 years old. The old king had brought her to the castle after that, honoring a promise made to 2 people who were no longer alive to hear it kept. Talia had survived the only way she knew how. She trained, every morning, every evening, until pain became familiar, until falling stopped frightening her, until getting back up felt more natural than staying down. The court never admired her for it. They admired bloodlines, names, wolves that woke on time and announced themselves properly. Talia had none of those things. To most of them, she was still the guard's orphan, the one without a wolf, the girl who had stayed too long in a place that had never fully opened its hand to her. But Lucian had noticed her. At least, that was what she had told herself for 10 long years. She had taken every glance, every easy smile, every quiet touch, and turned it into proof. When he found her after training and said, "You are different from the others, Talia," she let herself believe he meant something real by it. When he chose the seat beside her at informal dinners, when he found her in the stables, when he made her laugh in the middle of dull ceremonies, she gathered all of it and treated it like a promise, even when he never gave her one. She knew better now. She had known better for 3 days, since Bryn arrived. Bryn had come to Valethorn beautiful, polished, and perfectly sure of herself. She moved through court like she already understood every weakness in the room and had decided which one she would use first. Lucian had become interested almost immediately. Talia had watched that happen at dinner the first night. Bryn had laughed at something Lucian said, then turned her cold blue eyes on Talia and smiled. So this is Talia. Just that. Not friend, not future, not even a title she did not have. Only a name dropped onto the table like something being measured and dismissed. Lucian had smiled into his wine and said nothing. After that came more of the same. Bryn at Lucian's side in the hall. Bryn leaning close to speak into his ear. Bryn touching his arm as though she had been doing it for years. Lucian laughing too easily, looking too pleased with himself. Meeting Talia's eyes only long enough for guilt to flash through them before he looked away. He did not love her. He loved that she stayed. There was a difference, and Talia hated how long it had taken her to learn it. A small burst of laughter rose near the front of the hall. Talia did not need to look to know 2 noble girls were staring at her again. She had seen one of them glance at her dress and whisper behind a jeweled hand when she entered. Then the laughter stopped, a gaze from the raised dais. Talia did not look up. She knew who sat there. She had felt Aldrich's attention before, at the edge of training grounds and across crowded halls, always silent, always impossible to misread and impossible to understand. Tonight she had no room in herself to think about him. Only Lucian. Only the ritual. Only the hope she kept trying to kill and could not. The night before, she had found Lucian in the gardens. He had looked bad, tired, restless, too much wine in his face, too little courage left anywhere else. When he saw her, he went still for half a second, and in that half second, she saw the truth plainly. He knew he was about to hurt her. Still, she asked, "Lucian, tomorrow, are you still—" She stopped and made herself begin again. "You made a declaration in front of everyone. I need to know if you meant it." He took her hands. They should have felt familiar. They didn't. "Trust me," he said. "I would never let you down. You know that." She had stood there, staring at him, wanting to ask the question properly. "Do you choose me when it is easy, or do you choose me when people are watching?" But she had not said it. She had nodded instead. He kissed her forehead, called her by name in that soft voice he used when he wanted something from her, and left her standing alone among the dark hedges. She had told herself to believe him. She had almost managed it. Now the ritual had begun. Most wolves knew their mates by instinct. The royal line still made the claim in public, inside the sacred circle, before elders and court, and once spoken, it carried the force of law. One by one, young wolves stepped into the circle. Claims were made, hands joined, vows spoken into the hush of the hall. Talia watched and waited. Each passing claim tightened something in her chest. Then Lucian's name was called. He stepped into the circle with that same easy grace that had once made her think he would never humiliate her in public. Talia stepped away from the column. She walked toward him. The room noticed immediately. Whispers started low, then spread. "The one without a wolf? Surely he isn't going to. This must be a joke." Someone else, not whispering quite quietly enough, said, "Maybe she asked him to do it before he sobered up." Heat climbed Talia's throat, but she kept walking. Lucian saw her coming and looked down. "This year," he said. His voice was quiet, gentle almost. The voice of a man trying to make betrayal sound reasonable. "This year, I claim no one." Everything in her stopped. Her feet, her breath, her thoughts. She stood at the edge of the sacred circle, not quite inside it, not quite outside it, while the words settled over the hall. Lucian still did not look at her. "Perhaps at the next ritual," he added. "Perhaps then." Perhaps. She had built 10 years of her life on perhaps, on later, on one day, on the next time he looked at her like he meant it. Now he had thrown that word at her in front of the entire court. The whispers came back harder. A few people did not bother to hide their satisfaction. Talia could not move. The tears burned, hot, furious, right behind her eyes. Not here. Not in front of them. Not with Bryn smiling across the hall. Not while Lucian stood there pretending silence made this kinder. Half the room already looked relieved to be proven right about her. She told herself to turn around, to walk, to survive this the way she had survived everything else. Her body would not obey. Then the hall changed. A shift in the air. A ripple through the room. A figure rose from the ceremonial throne. Aldrich. He came down from the dais with slow, deliberate certainty. Every step echoed. His face was controlled, unreadable. His eyes were not. They were fixed on Lucian now, and whatever passed between the brothers in that glance made the prince go pale before a word was even spoken. Aldrich walked straight through the sacred circle, as though ancient law had made room for him. Then he stopped beside Talia. Close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off him. Close enough that the noise in her head went quiet for one strange second. He looked at Lucian. The prince took one instinctive step back. Then Aldrich turned to the hall, to the elders, the nobles, Bryn. Every face that had been watching Talia break. When he spoke, his voice was calm, completely, devastatingly calm. "My brother could not claim her." Silence hit the room like a blow. Aldrich did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Because the one who will do it is me. The hall exploded. Voices from every corner. Elders pushing to their feet. Nobles turning to one another with shock written openly across their faces. Someone dropped a goblet and it shattered on the marble. Talia heard all of it from a distance. Aldrich had turned to her. He did not touch her, did not pull her forward, did not force the moment into something it was not. He only held out his hand, palm up, open, an offer, a question, a choice. Talia stared at it, then at him. She looked for duty, strategy, pity, some political calculation that would make sense of what he had just done. She found none of it, only certainty. And Talia, who had spent 10 years taking scraps and calling them enough, put her hand in his. The instant their skin met, something inside her shifted. Her wolf. It moved, slow, certain, like it had always been there, waiting. Waiting for this. For him. Talia's breath caught. She had never felt it before. Not once. The ritual ended in noise. Voices, movement, the room breaking back into itself. Talia barely heard any of it. Her hand slipped from Aldrich's at some point. She didn't remember when. Only that the feeling stayed. The next morning, Talia woke disoriented. The ceiling was wrong, too high. The sheets beneath her hands were too soft. The morning light fell at an angle she had never woken to before. Then memory rushed back. All of it. The sacred circle. Lucian. Aldrich's hand in hers. She closed her eyes, opened them again. The room did not change. Neither had the fact that she had gone to sleep in her own narrow chamber and woken in rooms meant for the king's chosen. A knock sounded at the door. "My lady." The voice was female. "The king requests your presence at breakfast." The maid's name was Marta. She came in without waiting for permission, set a tray by the window, and held up a dress before Talia had fully sat up. Dark green, simple cut, fine fabric. The kind that felt expensive before it even touched the skin. "From the king's chambers," Marta said. "He thought you might want to change before going down." Talia took the dress. He had thought about what she would need this morning before she had thought of it herself. That should not have mattered as much as it did. As Marta helped fasten the ties at her back, Talia caught her own reflection in the mirror. Same face, same dark eyes, same hands that had bled on the training grounds more times than she could count. And yet she did not quite look like the woman who had walked into the ritual the night before. "What are they saying?" Talia asked. "The court. What are they saying this morning?" Marta's hands paused for a moment. That the council met before dawn, that the elders want the claim annulled, that half the castle thinks the king acted out of anger, and the other half thinks the gods themselves would not dare unwind a claim made inside the sacred circle. And the prince? Where is he? The question slipped out before she could stop it. "My lady?" Marta sounded confused. Talia held her gaze. "Lucian, where is he?" "He left, my lady." Talia stilled. "Left?" The maid nodded. "Before dawn. Took only what he needed. No escort. No word." "No one seems to know where he's gone." Talia looked away first. Of course. That was exactly like him. Talia looked back at the mirror. She should have felt triumph. She felt tired. And under that, something stranger. As if some part of her was still standing in that hall with Aldrich's hand around hers, waiting to understand what had changed. The breakfast hall was already full when she entered. Not with ordinary morning conversation, with silence. Counselors, elders, high nobles who had clearly rearranged their entire day to witness what happened next. At the head of the table sat Aldrich. The seat at his right had been left empty, for her. He rose when she walked in. The gesture was small, but the room felt it. Talia felt it. Kings did not stand for anyone. Aldrich looked directly at her. Talia, sit. She crossed the room under a weight of staring faces and took the chair beside him. Some of the hostility around the table did not bother hiding itself now. One elder looked openly offended. A counselor near the end of the table stared at her hands, as if checking whether a woman like her had any right to touch polished silver. And across from her sat Bryn. Perfect this morning. "Talia, dear," Bryn said. "What a lovely dress. Green suits you. It almost makes this feel intentional." The room went still. Aldrich had been setting down his goblet. He did not look at Bryn when he spoke. "Lady Bryn." Only 2 words, but they landed like steel. Bryn's smile thinned. Aldrich lifted his eyes to hers. "You are a guest in this castle. Guests do not speak to my queen that way." Not loud, not theatrical. Simply final. Bryn lowered her gaze to her plate. That silence returned, heavier this time. Then Counselor Vance cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, the Council has concerns about the claim, about precedent, about placing a woman without a wolf in the Queen's seat." Talia felt every eye shift back to her. Aldrich set down his goblet. "The Queen's seat is beside me," he said. "If Talia is in it, the discussion is over." Vance tried again. "Your Majesty, with respect, succession, a claim was made inside the sacred circle." Aldrich cut in. "It carries the force of law." His gaze moved slowly around the table. "Talia has every protection and privilege this position grants. Any insult to her is an insult to the crown. If that is unclear, I can make it clearer." No one spoke. Vance sat back. Aldrich picked up his goblet. "Good," he said. "Then let us eat." Talia did not taste much of the meal. She found him afterward in the corridor outside the hall. She turned a corner, and there he was. They fell into step beside each other. "Thank you," Talia said, "for this morning." Aldrich did not look at her. "You do not need to thank me." "I know," she let out a breath. "I wanted to." That earned the smallest change at the corner of his mouth. Talia looked ahead. "The council will keep pushing. As long as She stopped. Her fingers tightened slightly against the table. She tried again, quieter this time. "As long as they think I don't have one." Aldrich didn't interrupt. The silence held just long enough for her to decide. "It did something," she said. "Last night." Now she looked at him. "When I took your hand." Aldrich's attention sharpened, but he didn't move. Talia held his gaze for a moment, then continued. "It wasn't a full awakening. But it wasn't nothing either." She paused, choosing the words carefully. "It felt like something answered." Aldrich watched her steadily. "What did it feel like?" "Like it had been there the whole time," she said. "Just waiting." That was the first moment something shifted in him. He gave a single nod. "Then it's already begun." He gave her nothing more than that, and something in his tone told her not to ask.
Chapter 2.
By midday, the castle walls had started to close in on her. So Talia went to the stables. The bruise at her shoulder was already throbbing beneath the cloth she pressed against it. One of the guards on the training field had swung harder than necessary that morning, then looked surprised when she hit the dirt. The second had laughed. Neither had bothered hiding why. The king's choice had made them brave in exactly the wrong way. Talia sat on an upturned bucket in the quiet shade, breathing through the ache, when footsteps sounded at the entrance. She looked up. Aldrich stood there, framed by morning light. His eyes went immediately to the red seeping through the cloth at her shoulder. "You are bleeding." "It is a scratch." "It is not." He stepped inside with that same controlled economy he seemed to bring to everything. I saw what happened. The blow was intentional. Talia frowned. You were watching the training grounds? Something moved over his face too quickly to name. I watch my soldiers. A brief pause. All of them. The answer should have been enough. It wasn't. She almost said it. You do not watch all of them the way you watch me. But the words stayed where they were. She pushed herself to her feet. I will see the healer. Talia. His voice stopped her before she had taken 2 steps. She turned. He was closer than she expected. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. Are you certain about Lucian? Talia's guard went up at once. What do you mean? Aldrich held her gaze. I mean, last night was not an accident. It was not nerves. It was not bad timing. His jaw tightened. My brother likes what is in front of him. Then something new appears, and suddenly that matters more. Talia hated that part of her had already known. Aldrich did not move. You deserve someone who is certain. That hurt more than it should have. Not because it was cruel, because the man saying it sounded like he had been certain for a very long time. Talia drew herself up. Lucian chose me, she said. Whatever Bryn is doing does not change what he declared. Something shuddered in Aldrich's face. As you wish. He stepped aside. Talia walked past him, close enough to feel the heat of him. Thalia's boots rang against the stone, a frantic rhythm she couldn't outrun. Still performing, Thalia? Or is the martyrdom just a habit now? Thalia stopped dead. Bryn was there, leaning against a pillar, watching her with a look that was more clinical than cruel. Defending him, Bryn said, pushing off the stone. Like a well-trained dog, even after he's kicked you. I didn't... You did. You always do. Bryn's voice was a scalpel, precise and bloodless. You don't speak for him. You speak for the version of him you had to invent so you wouldn't have to admit you're pathetic. Thalia's jaw tightened. You don't know anything about, I know he's gone, and I know you're still here, holding a door he slammed in your face. Bryn stepped into her space, her eyes tracking every flinch. He didn't just leave the palace, Thalia. He left the territory. He didn't stay for the council, he didn't stay for the fallout, and he certainly didn't stay for you. He packed what he wanted, took who he wanted, and vanished before the sun hit the spires. The air in the corridor turned to ice. Took who? Bryn's smile was a jagged edge. Not you. The silence was a physical weight, but Bryn didn't let up. You think he hesitated because of pressure? Because he was torn? Bryn leaned in, her voice a lethal low-frequency hum. He didn't hesitate because he loved you. He hesitated because he was checking to see if there was anything left worth stealing. Thalia's fingers curled into her palms until her nails drew blood. You were a convenience, Bryn whispered. A placeholder until something better walked in. You weren't his partner, Thalia. You were his shadow. And the second the lights went out, he didn't need you anymore. Thalia inhaled, her voice a hollow, broken thing. That's enough. Bryn didn't look away. She didn't blink. She just looked at Thalia like she was a puzzle she had finally solved. Is it? Bryn asked. She stepped back, the mockery replaced by a cold, final dismissal. Good. It's about time you heard the truth from someone who isn't paid to lie to your face. Bryn turned and walked away, her heels clicking a steady, mocking rhythm on the stone. Thalia didn't follow. She didn't argue. For the first time, she didn't try to soften the blow or fix the wreckage. She just stood there and let the truth burn. The echo of Bryn's voice was still crawling under Talia's skin long after the stone corridors had gone silent. You were an alibi. The words were a bruise she couldn't stop touching. She had stood in that yard and defended a man who hadn't even stayed. Why? Habit? Stupidity? She felt pathetic, a hollow shell of a woman protecting a ghost while the real world moved on without her. She was still staring into the dying embers of her hearth when the knock came. It wasn't a servant's tap. It was heavy, final. Talia opened the door and the air in the room seemed to vanish. Aldrich stood there, stripped of his crown and his royal weight, wearing nothing but a dark tunic and an expression that made her pulse spike. "I wanted to see how you were," Aldrich said. His voice was gravel and silk. "After this morning." Talia leaned against the heavy oak door, her knuckles white. "You could have sent a guard, Aldrich, or a healer." "I could have," he agreed, his eyes tracking the tension in her neck. "I didn't want the company. May I?" Talia stepped back, a silent invitation. He didn't just walk into the room, he occupied it. They sat by the fire, 2 chairs angled toward each other, the space between them thick with 10 years of almost. "You were 8, Aldrich said, his gaze fixed on the flames. "Training in the mud at Valethorn before the sun was even up. Why did you do it, Talia? Why push yourself until you broke?" Talia looked at the fire, her voice a low hum. "Because when you're 8 and you've lost everything, the only thing you can control is how much pain you can take before you cry. I didn't want anyone to see me fail." "I was 19 when they put the crown on my head," Aldrich said softly. "I spent 3 days in the dark because I didn't want them to see me tremble. We've both been performing for an audience that didn't deserve the show." Talia looked at him then, really looked at him. The king was gone. There was only the man. The silence stretched, but it wasn't awkward anymore. It was hungry. The air in the room shifted. It became heavy, charged with a static that made the hair on Talia's arm stand up. Aldrich reached out, slowly, as if he were approaching a wounded animal. His hand didn't grab. It hovered, waiting for her to pull away. When his fingers finally brushed her jaw, Talia flinched. Just a fraction. Aldrich froze. He started to pull back, his jaw tightening with a rejection he had clearly felt 1,000 times before. "Talia, No," she whispered. She didn't let him retreat. Talia leaned forward, closing the gap herself, her hand covering his to keep him there. The heat of his skin was a revelation. It wasn't the lukewarm affection she'd known with his brother. It was a wildfire. She kissed him, and the world shattered. Aldrich didn't just return the kiss, he claimed it. His hands found her waist, pulling her flush against him until she could feel the frantic rhythm of his heart matching her own. This wasn't a king being polite. This was a man who had been starving at his own table for a decade. Then the heat changed. It started deep in her marrow, a violent, agonizing expansion. Her sternum felt like it was being pried open by a crowbar. Aldrich tore away, his eyes blown wide, gasping for air. "Talia!" She couldn't answer. The scream stayed trapped in her throat as her body began to break and rebuild itself in the dark. The first shift. The stories were a lie. The first shift wasn't a transition, it was a dismantling. Talia felt her skeleton snap and reform in heartbeats. Her senses went nuclear. She heard the rush of Aldrich's blood, she smelled the pine on his skin and the dying roses 3 floors below. A guttural howl ripped out of her, and then she was on 4 paws. The room was sharper, more vivid. Aldrich was on his knees, his own wolf pressing against his surface, his eyes a predatory gold. "Talia," he whispered, "you are... God, you're extraordinary." She stepped forward, her nose brushing his cheek. A shockwave leveled her. The scent hit her like a physical blow, a truth so ancient it didn't need a name. Mate. The realization was absolute. She shifted back, human and shaking, as Aldrich wrapped his jacket around her. "You felt it," he said, pulling her into his chest. "You knew," Talia choked out. "You knew what we were even back then." "My wolf knew the second we touched at the ritual," Aldrich said, his grip bruising. "But I couldn't claim you while your wolf was asleep. I had to watch you look at my brother, knowing you were mine." Talia pulled back to look at him. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because," Aldrich said, his eyes dark with a decade of restraint. "Because you were still looking at my brother. No jealousy in it, no accusation, just the truth, clean and unsparing. And somehow that made it hit harder." Talia looked at him for a long moment. This man who had watched from towers and training fields and stable doors. This man who had seen her humiliated and stepped in without asking for anything back. "I see you now," she said. Her voice was quiet but steady. "I see you clearly." Aldrich pressed his forehead to hers and shut his eyes for 1 second. "I have wanted to hear that for longer than I am prepared to admit." That almost made her laugh and almost made her cry again instead. So she kissed him, slow this time, deliberate, not a leap, a choice. The bond between them pulsed warm and sure, like a second heartbeat settling into place. When she drew back, she searched his face. "What happens now?" Aldrich answered without hesitation. "Now, nothing happens that you do not want." Talia touched his face again, just to make sure he was real. Outside, the moon hung full and bright over the gardens of Valethorn. 3 days after her wolf awakened, Talia was on the training grounds when everything changed again. She was learning to run on 4 paws. That was harder than it sounded. Her wolf still felt new, borrowed, powerful in ways Talia did not yet trust. She turned too sharply on the wet grass. Her back legs slid out from under her, and she went down hard enough to end with her nose in the dirt. Aldrich's voice carried from the stone stands. "You are thinking like a human." Talia shifted back with a sharp breath and caught the cloak he already had ready for her. "That is because I was human for all of 5 minutes ago." The corner of his mouth moved. He came down from the stands while she pushed wet hair back from her face. "Stop trying to force every movement," he said. "Let her lead sometimes." Talia tightened the cloak around herself. "Easy to say. Your wolf has had years with you. Mine showed up, wrecked my life, and now expects me to run like I know what I'm doing." "You are progressing faster than anyone I have ever seen." She looked at him flatly. "I just ate dirt." "Relatively gracefully." That earned him a handful of grass thrown straight at his chest. Aldrich caught it without looking and set it aside as if this was a normal part of his day now. Then he smiled. Brief, real, gone too quickly. But not before Talia saw it. And like every time it happened, she had the ridiculous thought that she could spend a very long time trying to earn that smile on purpose. A guard came running across the field before she could say any of that. He bowed fast. "Your Majesty, forgive the interruption. There is a woman at the gates, an elder. She says she has come to see the Queen." Aldrich straightened. "What name?" "Ursa, Your Majesty." The guard hesitated. "She says she was there the night the Queen was born." The private audience chamber was cold, but the woman standing in the center of it looked like she had been carved from the earth itself. Ursa was tiny, bent over a gnarled staff, her white hair braided with beads that clicked like a death rattle when she moved. But when she looked up, her eyes weren't old, they were predatory. "You have your mother's eyes," Ursa said, her voice a low rasp. "And your father's arrogance when he was about to walk into a storm." Talia stopped mid-stride. "You knew them." "Child, I brought you into this world." Ursa limped forward, the staff thudding against the stone. "I held your mother through the labor. I cut your cord. I was the first soul to ever hear you scream. The grief Talia had buried at 8 years old hit her like a physical blow. She didn't have memories, just fragments. The smell of wood smoke, a father's laugh. They never told me, Talia managed, her voice tight. They never said where they came from, what they were. Because knowledge is a target, Talia, Ursa snapped, and you were born with a bullseye on your back. They wanted you to be a girl before you had to be a legend. They died when I was 8, Talia reminded her. The legend didn't save them. They died fulfilling a purpose you haven't even begun to understand. Ursa gestured to the window, but she didn't look at the gardens. She looked at Talia. Your mother was the last daughter of the eternal moon. That's not just a pack name, child. It's a bloodline that predates every crown in this wasteland. They were the guardians. The land didn't belong to them. They belonged to the land. They could feel a threat in the soil before the enemy even sharpened their blades. Talia felt a low thrum in her chest, a resonance she couldn't explain. And my father? Northern warrior blood. Primal. Violent. Ursa's eyes narrowed. When they came together, the elders knew. They knew something rare, something that hasn't walked this earth in centuries, was about to be born. Me, Talia whispered. You. Ursa stepped into her space, the scent of crushed herbs and ancient magic following her. You aren't just a wolf, Talia. You are the bridge. Why Veilthorn? Talia asked, her heart racing. Why did they bring me here? Because guardians go where the blood is thin, Ursa said. Your mother knew your fate was woven into this stone. She knew your life was tied to this crown, and to the king who would eventually wear it. The mate bond pulsed in Talia's chest, a hot, rhythmic confirmation of Aldrich's face. They died protecting a kingdom that didn't even know their names, Talia said, a spark of bitterness catching. They died ensuring you survived to claim it, Ursa corrected. The power isn't a gift, Talia. It's a debt. And the people who killed your parents are still out there, waiting to see if the seed they tried to crush finally sprouted. Talia straightened her shoulders, the weight of the revelation settling over her like armor. I don't know how to be what they were. Ursa smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing Talia had ever seen. I didn't come here to teach you, child. I came to wake you up. The memory is in your marrow. You just have to stop being afraid of the noise. Ursa leaned in, her voice a lethal whisper. We start tonight, under the moon. Let's see if there's any of your mother's fire left in those eyes. Talia let the cool night air hit her face, trying to drown out the heat Ursa had stirred in her blood. She was deep in the rose hedges when a voice, sharp and entitled, cut through the silence. She bewitched him. It's the only explanation. Talia stopped. It was Bryn. She was holding court with 2 young nobles, her voice projecting with the practiced ease of a woman who had never been told to shut up. A woman with no wolf, no name, and no standing? Suddenly the king's mate? Bryn laughed, a hollow, brittle sound. Power like that is either a miracle or a performance, and I know which one I believe. In the past, Talia would have flinched. She would have tucked her head and walked away. But the wolf in her marrow was awake now, and it was furious. Talia stepped around the hedge. The 2 nobles scrambled back as if they'd seen a ghost. Bryn didn't move, but the smug smile on her face faltered. Talia, we were just... I heard exactly what you were, Talia said. You came here for Lucian, and you failed. You stayed because you thought you could scavenge a win from the wreckage. And now you're standing in my garden, spitting poison. I was merely having a conversation, Bryn started. If I hear one more whisper, Talia stepped into Bryn's personal space, her eyes flashing with a light that wasn't reflected fire. One more concern dressed as a slur, I will personally ask the king to escort you to the border. And we both know he won't even ask why. Do I make myself clear, Lady Bryn? The silence was absolute. Bryn's throat hitched as she recalculated the woman standing in front of her. Perfectly, Your Majesty, Bryn spat, the title sounding like a curse. Talia didn't wait for a dismissal. She turned and walked toward the king's study. She didn't tremble. She didn't look back. Talia didn't stop until she reached Aldrich's study. She didn't knock. She leaned against the doorframe, her chest heaving, the ghost of Bryn's insults still burning in her ears. Aldrich looked up from a map, his eyes instantly tracking the tension in her shoulders. "Bryn," he said. It wasn't a question. "I handled it," Talia said, her voice tighter than she intended. "I know," Aldrich replied, a ghost of a smirk touching his lips. "I heard you from the hall. You didn't just handle her, Talia. You dismantled her." "I'm tired of being an alibi for people who aren't even here, Aldrich." He stood, walking toward her until the heat from his body acted like a physical weight. "You were never an alibi to me." He reached out, his thumb grazing her lower lip. "You were the only thing in this palace that felt real." Talia leaned into the touch, the fury draining out of her, replaced by something much more dangerous. "Ursa says my life is tied to this crown. To you." "Your life is yours, Talia," Aldrich whispered, his forehead dropping to hers. "The crown is just the gold that keeps the world from taking you." He kissed her then, not with the desperation of the night before, but with a quiet, terrifying promise. A vow that whatever was coming, he would be the shield. 3 weeks later, the peace of Valethorn shattered with the sound of iron hitting stone. Talia was in the courtyard when the gates groaned open. Her new senses, sharper, louder, more violent, screamed at her before the riders even appeared. She smelled road dust, old blood, and a scent that made her stomach drop. Lucian. He looked like a man who had crawled out of his own grave. Thinner, his golden hair matted with filth, his eyes hollowed out by a haunting she didn't recognize. Beside him sat a woman in scarred northern leathers, her hand never leaving the hilt of her blade. "Get the king," Talia commanded a guard, her voice cutting through the rising murmurs of the servants. "Now!" Aldrich appeared within minutes. He descended the stone steps with the cold, measured grace of a monarch, his jaw set in a line of pure granite. For 3 weeks, he had been a man possessed, furious at the brother who had rejected Talia and vanished, but terrified that the boy he'd raised had died in a ditch somewhere with no one to claim the body. The brothers locked eyes. The silence was a physical weight. Aldrich's mask didn't just slip, it shattered. He lunged forward, not with a blade, but with his arms, pulling Lucian into a crushing, desperate embrace. He held him like he was trying to stitch him back together. "You idiot," Aldrich growled into his brother's shoulder, his voice thick. "You took nothing. No gold, no guards. I thought you were dead." Lucian didn't fight him. He collapsed into the hug, his hands gripping Aldrich's tunic as if he were drowning. "I'm sorry, brother. I'm so damn sorry." Aldrich pulled back, his hands staying on Lucian's shoulders. He looked him over, the exhaustion, the beard, the trauma. Then, in a heartbeat, the big brother vanished and the king returned. He looked at the woman in leathers. "Talk," Aldrich commanded. The air in the council chamber was thick enough to choke on. Sable of Norath spread a map across the oak table, her finger marking 3 kingdoms: Valdenmoor, Sereth, and Dawnholt. 15,000 men, Sable said, her voice like grinding stone. "They're massed at the border forests. They strike at the full moon." "On what grounds?" a counselor demanded. "They claim the Queen's bloodline is a threat to the continent," Sable replied, her eyes finding Talia's. "But that's the lie they tell the public." Lucian leaned against the wall, his voice a ragged shadow of its former self. "I was at a border tavern when the assassins found me. They weren't soldiers, Aldrich. They were specialists. They didn't want to capture me. They wanted to erase the line of succession before the main event." Talia leaned over the map, her wolf pacing restlessly in her mind. "This isn't just about power. This feels personal." Ursa, who had been sitting in the shadows, spoke for the first time. It is. The room went silent as the elder moved into the light. The men leading this alliance, the Secret Three, they aren't just kings. They are the descendants of the men who hunted the eternal moon. They didn't kill your parents for land, Talia. They did it to end the bloodline. They thought they succeeded. And now they've realized they missed a girl, Aldrich said, his voice dropping to a lethal, low hum. Exactly, Ursa whispered. This isn't a war of conquest. It's a purge. They are coming to finish what they started 8 years ago. Talia looked at the map, then at Aldrich. The fear that usually lived in her chest was gone, replaced by a cold, crystalline purpose. They think I'm a prey animal they forgot to kill, Talia said, her voice steady enough to draw blood. We aren't going to hide behind these walls and wait for them to find me. Talia? Lucian asked, his eyes wide. We ride to the border, she said, looking at the king. We meet them in the neutral lands. If they want to see the monster they're so afraid of, let's give them a front row seat. Aldrich reached out, his hand covering hers on the map. A dark, proud smile spread across his face. At dawn, the king declared, we ride. That night, the corridors of Valethorn felt like a tomb. Talia turned a corner and froze. Lucian was there, staring out a window at the gardens where they had spent a decade playing at love. I'm not going to apologize, Lucian said, his voice sandpaper rough. An apology is a down payment on a debt I can't ever settle. Talia didn't move. No, it isn't. He turned. The moonlight carved out the hollows of his face, making him look older, and finally, painfully honest. You look different, Talia. I am different. I see that. He swallowed hard. Aldrich, he's good to you. He is. I never would have been, Lucian admitted, the words landing like stones. I kept you close because you made me feel like the man I wished I was. That wasn't love. It was a parasite wearing love's skin. The sting Talia expected didn't come. The truth was too cold for that. And Sable? She asked. Who is she to you? A raw, unguarded heat flared in Lucian's eyes, something Talia had never seen when he looked at her. I don't know yet, he whispered. But I think she might be the reason I survived that tavern. Then don't waste it, Talia said, walking past him. Talia? She paused, but didn't turn. I'm glad it was him, Lucian said quietly. I'm glad it was my brother. Talia closed her eyes for a heartbeat. So am I. 2 corridors away, Sable was checking the cinches in the stables when the air shifted. She didn't need to turn. The mate bond was a relentless, invisible tether, pulling her toward the man she had dragged out of a border town brawl. You should be resting, Sable said to the shadows. Long ride at dawn. I don't want to rest. I want to talk. Sable turned. Lucian stood in the doorway, his eyes focused with a lethal clarity. Gone was the drunken prince. In his place was a man who had found his North Star. You know what this is, Lucian said, stepping into her space. You've known since the tavern. Sable gripped a leather strap until her knuckles turned white. I'm not asking for anything, Lucian. I know, and I haven't earned it yet. He stopped inches from her, his scent, snow and desperation, filling her lungs. But I'm going to. After tomorrow, after we survive this, I intend to become someone worthy of that pulse in your chest. He didn't wait for her to argue. He turned and disappeared into the night. Sable pressed a hand to her heart, feeling the bond thrumming like a second heartbeat. Gods, she breathed to the empty stalls. The horse beside her snorted. It sounded like a warning. The neutral border was a graveyard of silence. No pulse, no memory, just flat gray earth waiting for blood to give it a name. Aldrich sat tall in his saddle, 50 of Veilthorn's elite wolves behind him. To his left, Lucian and Sable. To his right, Talia, and behind them, Ursa, watching the horizon with eyes that had seen empires fall. Then, the North answered. The silver wolf of Norath Crest appeared first, followed by thousands of soldiers in perfect, terrifying formation. General Brennan rode out, a mountain of a man who looked at Talia with something bordering on worship. Your mother held a border alone for 6 hours against 30 men, Brennan said, his voice a low rumble. I've waited a lifetime to see if the daughter was made of the same steel. I guess we're about to find out, Talia replied. The 3 rulers rode forward to the center of the field. This was the dead zone. 100 meters of dirt where no law existed but the one they were about to write. King Alaric of Valdenmoor arrived first, his horse draped in silk, his gold-plated armor catching the light. King Dorian of Sereth followed, his eyes darting between Aldrich's wolves and the Norath banners. He wasn't looking for a fight. He was looking for an exit strategy. But it was Queen Ara of Dawnholt who held Talia's gaze. She rode a massive white mare, her silver armor scarred and functional. She didn't look afraid. They stopped 10 meters out. The silence was so heavy it felt like a physical weight on Talia's chest. King Aldrich, Alaric began, his voice thin in the vastness of the field. We come in peace. We come for a dialogue. Peace usually doesn't bring 15,000 shifters to a neighbor's door, Alaric, Aldrich countered. What is the dialogue? Or should I let the Norath archers currently aiming at your throats start the conversation? Dorian cleared his throat, his horse dancing nervously. We have concerns, Veilthorn. There are rumors, an ancient bloodline, a power that hasn't been seen since the Great Purge. We cannot have a volatile element sitting on the throne of a neighboring kingdom. A volatile element? Talia spoke for the first time. Her voice didn't shake, it didn't plead. It carried across the field with a resonance that made the enemy guards visibly flinch. You mean a woman you can't control? We mean a threat, Alaric snapped, his arrogance finally breaking through. The Eternal Moon bloodline nearly leveled this continent once. We won't let it happen again. Then you should have sent more men, Sable said, stepping her horse forward. She held up the sealed scroll, the wax reflecting a dull red. Because while you were busy playing at preventative containment, we were busy collecting your signatures. Every letter, every secret meeting, every order to assassinate the spare heir. She looked at Lucian, then back at the kings. If we don't return to Veilthorn, King Edrin of Norath releases these to the High Council. You won't be heroes, Alaric. You'll be war criminals. The color drained from Alaric's face. Dorian looked like he was about to vomit, but Ara just kept watching Talia. The letters don't matter if we're dead, Ara said quietly. And you know as well as I do, girl, if you are what they say you are, you're a match in a hayloft. Tell me, are you a queen, or are you a weapon? Talia looked at Aldrich. He didn't give her an order. He didn't give her a nod. He simply opened his hand in a gesture of absolute, terrifying trust. Let me show you, Talia said. Talia dismounted. Each step she took into the center of the dead zone felt like a hammer blow. She could hear the grass snapping under her boots. She could hear the frantic heartbeat of Alaric's horse. She stopped exactly between the two forces. Ursa told me the land has no memory here, Talia said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow everyone heard. She was wrong. The land remembers the guardians. It's just been waiting for one to come home. She didn't shift into a wolf, not yet. First, she pulsed. A shockwave of silver light erupted from her sternum, leveling the grass for 50 yards in every direction. The horses of the three kings reared, screaming, as the very earth beneath them seemed to groan in recognition. Then, the dismantling began. The sound of her bones breaking was like a series of gunshots, but there was no scream. Talia's human form dissolved into a shadow that grew and grew and grew. When the dust settled, she wasn't just a wolf. She was a behemoth. She was the size of a war wagon, her fur a midnight black that seemed to pull the light out of the sky. Her paws were the size of shields, sinking inches into the neutral earth. But it was her eyes, molten, swirling silver, that froze the blood of 15,000 men. She didn't growl. She didn't have to. She let her consciousness expand. She reached out and touched the mind of every soldier on that field. And then, she showed them exactly how fragile their lives were compared to the land they were standing on. I am the bridge. Her voice echoed in their skulls, primal and ancient. I am the one who decides if you go home to your families or if you become the soil they walk on. She turned her massive head toward the three kings. She let a low, subharmonic hum vibrate through the air, a sound that made the gold on Alaric's armor rattle against his chest. Choose, she commanded. Queen Ara was the first to find her breath. She didn't reach for a weapon. She slowly, deliberately, lowered her head in a bow that was as much about survival as it was about respect. Alaric looked like a broken doll. Dorian had stopped breathing entirely. Talia shifted back. She didn't fall. She didn't shake. She stood in the center of the field, human and absolute, as Sable draped a heavy fur cloak over her shoulders. I am a guardian, Talia said, her voice cutting through the ringing silence. I protect what is mine, my kingdom, my people, my king. She looked at Alaric, her eyes still shimmering with the last of the silver. The alliance ends here, or your kingdoms do. Choose. Ara dismounted first. Her boots hit the dirt with a decisive thud. She walked straight past her allies, straight to Aldrich, and extended her hand. Dawnholt signs, Ara said, her voice steady. I have no desire to be the queen who tried to fight the moon and lost. Dorian was next, his heels clicking as he scrambled off his horse. Serith concurs. We were misinformed. We seek only peace. Alaric sat alone on his horse for a long moment. He looked at the Norath army, then at the monster queen standing 10 feet away. He realized then that his gold meant nothing. His crown meant nothing. He was a small man in a very big world. He dismounted, his legs nearly giving way. Valdenmoor. Signs. As the sun began to dip behind the mountains, 5 kings and queens gathered around a makeshift table. The ink was wet, the seals were pressed into hot red wax, and the air finally returned to the neutral ground. Aldrich found Talia at the edge of the field as the armies began their long, silent retreat. He didn't say anything at first. He just wrapped his arm around her waist and pulled her flush against his side. You're shaking, he whispered into her hair. It's the adrenaline, she admitted, leaning her head on his shoulder. And the dirt. I think I'm going to be tasting neutral ground for a week. Aldrich. A low, warm sound that made the mate bond hum with contentment. You just saved 15,000 lives, Talia. I think we can afford to get you some wine to wash it down. Talia looked out at the horizon, at the banners disappearing into the trees. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a girl running from a storm. She was the storm. Aldrich? Yes? Let's go home. The ride back to Valethorn didn't feel like a victory lap. It felt like a massive, collective exhale. 15,000 soldiers had gone home without shedding a drop of blood, and the silence in the woods was finally peaceful instead of predatory. Talia watched from her saddle as Sable and Lucian rode side by side. They didn't touch. Sable was too busy acting like a soldier, but the air between them was practically humming. On the second night, the camp was quiet. Talia was moving toward the water barrels when she saw them near the edge of the firelight. Lucian was standing too close, and Sable had her arms crossed in that "don't even try it" posture she used like armor. "I'm not a prince anymore, Sable," Lucian said, his voice dropping into a register Talia had never heard. "I'm just a man who's tired of being saved. Let me be the one who stays this time." Sable didn't move for a long beat. Then, her arms uncrossed. She looked up at him, her gray eyes reflecting the flames, and she grabbed his tunic, pulling him down into a kiss that looked less like a romance and more like a takeover. Talia looked away, grinning at the dirt. She turned and found Aldrich watching her from his own horse. "Your brother," Talia whispered, "is currently being dismantled by a northern captain." Aldrich didn't even turn his head. "Good. Maybe she'll finally teach him how to sit still. I should probably send her father a bribe to make sure she stays." 3 days later, the Great Hall of Valethorn was packed to the rafters. It wasn't for a ritual or a funeral. It was for a homecoming. Lucian stood in the center, wearing blue and silver, looking like a man who had finally stopped apologizing for existing. Sable stood beside him in a dress that looked like it was losing a fight with her warrior's instinct. "Court of Valethorn," Lucian announced, his voice steady enough to crack stone. "I present Sable of Norath, my ally, my equal." He looked at her, and for the first time in 10 years, his charm was replaced by something real. "My mate." The room went dead silent. Aldrich rose from the throne, descending the steps with Talia at his side. He stopped in front of the woman who had dragged his brother out of the dark. "We witness this," Aldrich said, his king's mask firmly in place. "You are welcome here, Sable, as family." General Brennan, standing by a pillar with his arms crossed, let out a massive theatrical cough. "Envoy! She's staying as the official envoy of Norath, to strengthen the alliance. Right, daughter?" Sable didn't even blink. "Strictly professional, father. It has absolutely nothing to do with the prince." "Absolutely nothing," Lucian added, before leaning in and kissing her right in front of the entire council. "Get a room, Lucian!" someone yelled from the back. The hall erupted. It wasn't the polite applause of a court, it was a roar. Talia felt Aldrich's hand find hers, his grip tight and warm. Late that night, the castle finally settled. The wine was gone, the fires were embers, and the weight of the crown had been set aside for the dark. Talia found Aldrich at the window of their chambers. He had discarded his formal tunic, his shoulders bare in the moonlight. He looked younger like this, less like a king, and more like the man who had waited 10 years for her to look at him. Talia crossed the room and stood behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Aldrich," she whispered. He turned in her arms, his hands coming up to frame her face. "You've been quiet since the feast. Did the general scare you off with his stories?" "No," she said, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I've been waiting for the noise to stop." She took a breath, looking up at him. "I'm pregnant." Aldrich went completely, terrifyingly still. The silence stretched. 1 second. 2. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He looked like a man who had just been hit by lightning and was waiting for the sound of the thunder. "Talia," he finally gasped, his voice breaking. Are you sure?" "My wolf knows," she said, as a tear escaped. "It's still very small, But it's there, a guardian and a king. Aldrich didn't just smile, he crumbled. He pulled her into him, his face burying in the crook of her neck, his breath hitched. The man who had faced 3 armies without flinching was currently shaking in her arms. "A child," he whispered against her skin. "Our child." "Are we ready for this?" Talia asked, pulling back to look at him. "To raise a legend in this madhouse?" Aldrich wiped a stray tear from her cheek, his eyes bright with a light that had nothing to do with the moon. "Probably not," he admitted. "Lucian will be a terrible influence. The council will try to legislate the nursery, and Ursa will probably try to teach the baby how to hunt before it can walk." Talia, leaning her forehead against his. "So, business as usual?" "Business as usual," he promised. He kissed her then, slow, deep, and full of the years they had lost and the lifetime they had gained. Outside, the moon hung full and ancient over Valethorn. It had seen the parents die, watched the daughter hide, and waited for the king to find his heart. The moon had always known how the story would end. It was just waiting for them to finally come home. The end.